Welcome to our deep dive into Judson Brewer's Unwinding Anxiety.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Right.
Such an insightful book.
Yeah. So today we're going to be pulling out the most fascinating pieces from Unwinding Anxiety.
Sounds good.
Think of it as a cheat sheet for understanding anxiety,
I like that.
how it turns into a habit,
Yeah.
and then, how we can use mindfulness to unwind it.
Okay, so right off the bat, what really struck me about Brewer's approach was how he weaves in these personal anecdotes, like his own struggles with anxiety.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one story he told about.
Yeah, going from memorizing every public restroom in Princeton.
Because of anxiety-induced IBS
Exactly.
to full-blown panic attack.
Yeah.
And it's just a really powerful way to show how sneaky anxiety can be.
Yeah, and what's even more fascinating is that he initially denied having anxiety at all.
I know, right?
He was fit, he played the violin.
In his mind, those things meant you couldn't possibly be anxious.
Well, it really speaks to anxiety's shape-shifting nature, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It can look like so many different things, and it underscores the fact that anxiety is incredibly common.
Right.
Brewer actually cites some pretty startling statistics.
Okay, hit me with them.
Nearly 20% of Americans
Wow.
have dealt with an anxiety disorder in the past year alone.
That's a huge number.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
What really surprised me, though, was that he mentions that anxiety levels in the U.S. are actually at their lowest point ever.
What?
Yet reported anxiety is on the rise.
Oh, that's so interesting. How do we make sense of that?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brewer suggests that this paradox might stem from the way our modern world is set up.
Okay, I'm listening.
We're constantly bombarded with information.
Oh, for sure.
And choices, and it creates this sense of uncertainty that our brains, which are wired for survival, just aren't equipped to handle.
I think you're right.
Think about it. High-income countries,
Okay.
with their emphasis on achievement.
Yeah, and endless options.
Right, endless options. They actually have the highest anxiety rates globally.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
It's like our brains are stuck in overdrive trying to process everything.
Totally.
Leading to this feeling of overwhelm that we then label as anxiety.
Exactly. And Brewer actually goes deeper into the science behind this.
Okay, so break it down for us.
He's explaining how anxiety is born from a potent mix of fear and uncertainty.
Okay.
And our old brain...
That primal part of us.
Yes.
Okay.
The part responsible for survival.
Right.
It interprets uncertainty as a potential threat.
Okay.
Which then triggers a fear response.
Oh, wow. That makes total sense.
Right.
Yeah. So in essence, our brains haven't quite caught up to the complexities of modern life.
Yeah.
And that mismatch is fueling a lot of our anxiety.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And he even uses the example of stepping into traffic to illustrate how our fear responses work on different timescales.
Oh, okay.
So imagine you're almost getting hit by a car.
Oh, gosh.
Right. That immediate reflexive jump back.
Yeah.
That's pure fear.
Right.
And it's adaptive. It keeps us safe.
Totally.
But what happens next is interesting.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
So, what happens after that initial jolt?
Yeah.
Our brains go into learning mode.
Oh, okay.
They store that experience, creating an association between traffic and danger.
Right.
And this is how we develop, caution around cars.
Yeah.
But if this fear gets stuck in overdrive,
Okay.
always anticipating the worst case scenario, that's when it morphs into chronic anxiety.
Right. So it's not serving a helpful purpose.
Exactly.
It's just causing distress.
It is.
This really reframes anxiety, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just a feeling. It's almost like a biological program running in the background.
Totally.
Sometimes for no good reason.
Yeah.
You mentioned uncertainty being a key driver here.
Yeah.
And I remember Brewer talking about how COVID-19 had a huge impact on anxiety levels.
Oh, absolutely.
Did he connect that to uncertainty as well?
Definitely. So the pandemic, it brought a level of global uncertainty that most of us had never experienced before.
Yeah, that's true.
And Brewer highlights research showing a massive spike in anxiety during that time.
Makes sense.
Reported severe psychological distress in the U.S., it increased by 250% compared to just a few years prior.
Wow, that's huge.
It really underscores how powerful uncertainty is in fueling anxiety.
Yeah. So we've got this ancient part of our brain trying to protect us in a world that's become incredibly complex and uncertain.
Yeah.
Leading to this surge in anxiety. But Brewer also talks about anxiety not just being a feeling, but an actual habit loop.
Oh, yeah. That's a key concept.
Can you walk us through that idea?
Absolutely. So our brains are wired to seek rewards and avoid pain. And this reward-based learning is how we form habits,
Yeah.
both good and bad.
Right.
Think about a casino,
Okay.
which Brewer uses as like a brilliant analogy.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so casinos are masters at manipulating our reward system.
Oh, yeah.
The flashing lights,
Mm-hmm.
the sounds, the occasional wins,
Yeah.
they create a sense of excitement and anticipation.
Yeah, you get that little dopamine rush.
Right. But the key is that the rewards are intermittent
Mm-hmm.
and unpredictable.
You mean you don't win every time?
You do not win every time.
Right.
And that's what keeps us hooked.
Yeah.
Our brains, they get a little dopamine hit with each win. Even if we're losing overall,
Right.
it's that constant chase for the next reward that keeps us coming back.
Even though the odds are stacked against us.
Exactly, despite knowing the odds are stacked against us.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Okay, yeah.
So anxiety, like those slot machines, is also offering us a kind of false reward that keeps us stuck.
That's the crux of it.
Wow.
Yeah, so when we're anxious,
Hmm.
we often engage in behaviors like worrying or avoiding situations.
Yeah.
And even though these behaviors don't actually solve the problem,
Right.
they provide a temporary sense of control,
Okay.
a false sense of doing something.
Yeah, yeah.
And that sense of control becomes the reward,
Oh.
reinforcing the anxiety habit loop.
So we're not actually getting a real reward. We're just tricking our brains into thinking we are.
Precisely.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's like our brain is saying, hey, at least you're doing something about this threat.
Yeah.
Even if that something is just spinning in mental circles.
Right, right.
This is why anxiety can feel so hard to shake off.
Makes sense.
It's become a deeply ingrained habit,
Hmm.
driven by this flawed reward system.
This habit loop idea really makes me rethink my own anxiety.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling helpless, it feels like something I can actually work with.
It is. It is.
Brewer also spends some time debunking common misconceptions about anxiety, right?
He does.
Like the idea that it's necessary for success.
Absolutely.
Oh, man.
He takes on this idea that anxiety is somehow helpful
Okay.
for motivation or performance.
Right, that we need that little edge.
Yes.
Like to get things done.
But he argues that while some stress can be motivating,
Okay.
anxiety often hinders us more than it helps.
Interesting. So ditching anxiety doesn't mean we're suddenly going to lose our drive or become complacent.
Not at all. In fact, Brewer suggests that by learning to manage our anxiety, we can actually unlock our true potential,
Okay.
free from the limitations of constant worry and fear.
I like that.
And he goes on to introduce mindfulness as a powerful tool for unwinding this anxiety habit loop.
Okay, so this is where Brewer's research with his Unwinding anxiety app comes in, right?
Exactly.
The one showing a 63% reduction in anxiety with doctors and people struggling with generalized anxiety disorder.
Yes, that's a significant reduction.
It's huge.
And what's even more fascinating is that it's achieved through an app.
I know.
It's pretty amazing.
That's powerful.
So, Brewer's app leverages what he calls the 3 gears of mindfulness.
Okay, so this is where things get really practical.
Yes.
Can you break down how Brewer's app utilizes these mindfulness gears to actually change those deeply ingrained anxiety habits?
Absolutely. The first gear is what Brewer calls mind mapping.
Mind mapping.
Think of it as detective work.
Okay.
You're observing your anxiety, identifying the triggers that set it off,
Mm-hmm.
the behaviors you engage in when you're anxious,
Right.
and the results of those behaviors.
So we're not just passively experiencing anxiety, we're actively trying to understand its patterns.
Exactly.
This mind mapping idea reminds me of detective work. Have you ever tried tracking your own anxiety triggers?
Oh, absolutely.
And if so, what did you discover?
Oh, absolutely. And it's really fascinating what you start to see when you actually pay attention.
I bet.
So, for example, like I realized that checking social media right before bed often led to a spiral of anxious thoughts about work.
Oh, yeah. Doom scrolling.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I've been there.
And it was keeping me up like way later than I intended.
Makes sense.
And it's like shining a light on those subconscious patterns that drive so much of our behavior.
That's so true, yeah. It makes you realize how much we operate on autopilot, doesn't it?
It really does.
Okay, so we've mapped out our anxiety habit loop.
Okay.
What's the next gear in this process?
Okay, so that brings us to gear number 2, updating the reward value.
Updating the reward value. Okay.
This is where we start to question those rewards our brain thinks it's getting from anxiety.
Right.
Brewer gives the example of mindless eating.
Oh,
We've all been there, right?
oh yeah.
Reaching for a bag of chips when we're stressed, thinking it'll make us feel better.
Oh, definitely guilty of that one.
But if we actually pay attention, we might notice that the chips don't really make us feel better at all.
Yeah.
Maybe we feel momentarily distracted, but often we end up feeling guilty or even more sluggish.
Right.
So it's about being more present with our experience, noticing the actual results of our actions.
Instead of just operating on those automatic assumptions.
Exactly, yeah. And when we apply this to anxiety, we start to see that worrying doesn't actually solve the problem.
Right.
It might feel like we're doing something,
Yeah.
but often it just keeps us stuck in a cycle of fear and uncertainty.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. We're so used to the habit loop that we don't even stop to question if it's actually working.
Mm.
This second gear seems like it requires a lot of self-awareness.
Yes.
Is this where Brewer's behavioral tendencies questionnaire comes in, the BTQ?
Yes.
He mentioned it earlier. I wasn't quite sure how it fit into the picture.
Yeah, you're right. Self-awareness is key here. And the BTQ is a great tool for deepening that awareness. It helps us understand our natural tendencies when it comes to dealing with difficult situations and emotions.
Definitely.
Do we tend to approach things head on, avoid them altogether,
Right.
or go with the flow?
That's so interesting. It's like those personality quizzes, but with a focus on how we deal with discomfort.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm definitely curious to know more about my own tendencies. Can you give us an example of how knowing our BTQ could influence our approach to unwinding anxiety?
Absolutely. So let's say you discover through the BTQ that you have a strong tendency towards avoidance.
Okay.
When faced with anxiety, you might instinctively shut down, withdraw, or distract yourself. Now, knowing this, you can start to be more mindful of those avoidance patterns and experiment with different approaches.
So instead of beating yourself up for avoiding, you can use that awareness to choose a different path.
Exactly. So maybe instead of completely avoiding a social situation that triggers your anxiety, you could start by practicing mindfulness techniques beforehand to calm your nervous system.
Right.
Or you might try going for a short time and focusing on simply observing your experience without judgment.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've mapped out our habit loop. We're starting to see the lack of reward in our anxious behaviors, and we're understanding our natural tendencies. What's the final gear in this mindfulness approach to unwinding anxiety?
This is where it gets really exciting.
Ooh, I love exciting.
The third gear is all about finding a bigger, better offer, or what Brewer calls a BBO.
A bigger, better offer.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean in the context of anxiety?
It means finding something that is genuinely more rewarding than those old anxiety habits.
Okay.
This is where we start to replace worry and avoidance
Right.
with activities and experiences that truly nourish us.
Okay.
Things that bring us joy, peace, and a sense of purpose.
So it's about finding those things that make life feel richer and more meaningful and using them to crowd out those anxiety-driven behaviors.
Exactly. And this is where understanding our BTQ can be so helpful.
Right.
So if you tend to approach things head on, maybe your BBO involves channeling that energy into a creative project or learning a new skill.
Makes sense.
If you're more of an avoider, maybe your BBO is finding quiet time in nature
Yeah.
or practicing yoga to calm your nervous system.
It's starting to feel like unwinding anxiety isn't just about eliminating something negative,
Right.
but about replacing it with something positive, something that aligns with who we truly are.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about shifting from a place of fear and scarcity to a place of abundance and possibility. And one of the key ingredients in this shift is curiosity.
Curiosity, how does that play into all of this?
So Brewer talks about how curiosity can be a powerful antidote to fear. Instead of resisting our anxiety, we can approach it with a sense of curiosity, asking ourselves, what's happening here? What can I learn from this experience?
Okay.
It's like shifting from a fixed mindset, where we believe we're stuck with our anxiety, to a growth mindset, where we see it as an opportunity for learning and growth.
Yeah, that shift in perspective feels really powerful. It's like we're taking the anxiety's power away by simply choosing to be curious about it rather than afraid of it. Brewer mentions a few specific practices that can help cultivate this sense of curiosity, right? Like the rain practice and the noting practice.
Yes, these practices are all about cultivating mindfulness,
Okay.
which is essentially paying attention to the present moment with curiosity and non-judgment. The RAIN practice is a great tool for working with difficult emotions. It stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and note.
Okay, let's break that down. What does each step involve?
Okay, so first, we recognize what's happening. We acknowledge that we're feeling anxious without trying to push it away. Then we allow the experience to be there just as it is.
So we don't judge ourselves for feeling anxious. We simply allow it to exist.
That sounds incredibly difficult, especially when you're in the grip of anxiety.
It is. It takes practice.
Right.
But with time, we can learn to create space for those difficult emotions without getting swept away by them.
Yeah.
And that space is where the magic happens. Once we've recognized and allowed the anxiety, we can then investigate it with curiosity.
Okay, what kind of questions are we asking during this investigation phase?
So we might ask ourselves, where do I feel this anxiety in my body?
Oh.
What sensations are present? What thoughts are running through my mind? The key is to approach it with a gentle, curious attitude,
Okay.
like a scientist exploring a new phenomenon.
So it's like we're turning our anxiety into a subject of study rather than an enemy to be defeated.
Exactly. And the final step is to note what we observe.
Okay.
We can do this silently in our minds, simply labeling the experience.
Okay.
Anxiety, anxiety, tightness in chest, thinking, thinking. It's like we're becoming a mindful narrator of our own experience.
Exactly.
I can see how this practice could create a sense of detachment from the anxiety, allowing us to see it more clearly.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And this clarity is essential for making conscious choices about how we want to respond to anxiety.
Brewer also talks about shifting from a why mindset to a what mindset. Can you explain that distinction?
Yeah, it's a subtle but powerful shift. So when we're in the why mindset, we're constantly trying to figure out the reasons for our anxieties.
Right, like, why am I feeling this way? What's wrong with me?
Exactly. Why am I feeling this way? What's wrong with me? And this often leads to a lot of rumination and overthinking, which can just make the anxiety worse.
It's like we're stuck in a mental maze, trying to find our way out, but only getting more lost.
Totally. The what mindset, on the other hand, brings us back to the present moment. Instead of asking why, we ask what.
Yeah.
What am I feeling right now?
Right.
What sensations are present? What thoughts are running through my mind? This shift in focus allows us to observe our experience without getting caught up in the stories we're telling ourselves about it.
So it's about stepping out of the mental labyrinth and simply observing the landscape of our experience.
Beautifully put. And this simple shift can make a world of difference.
Brewer also talks about something called anxiety sobriety.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, it's a powerful concept that draws parallels with addiction recovery.
Okay.
Instead of trying to eliminate anxiety altogether, which can feel overwhelming and impossible, we focus on managing it one day, hour, or even moment at a time.
So it's about taking it one step at a time, focusing on what we can control in the present moment rather than getting bogged down by the enormity of the challenge.
Exactly. It's about developing a sense of agency and empowerment in relation to our anxiety rather than feeling like we're at its mercy.
Yeah.
And it's a much more sustainable approach than trying to white knuckle our way through life.
Yeah.
Constantly fearing the next wave of anxiety.
This idea of anxiety sobriety really resonates with me. It feels more approachable, more realistic. Brewer also talks about the importance of kindness and compassion, both toward ourselves and others, as powerful antidotes to anxiety. Why do you think those qualities are so important in this context?
Kindness and compassion are essential because they shift us out of that fear-based, self-critical mindset that often fuels anxiety. When we're kind to ourselves, we're less likely to judge ourselves harshly for feeling anxious. And when we're compassionate towards others, we're more likely to feel connected and supported, which can buffer against stress and isolation.
So it's about creating a more supportive internal and external environment.
Yeah.
A space where anxiety can't thrive.
Precisely. And Brewer's research actually shows that acts of kindness and compassion can shift our brain chemistry, boosting feelings of well-being and reducing stress hormones.
So being kind to others is actually good for our own mental health.
It is.
That's a win-win.
A win-win.
Yeah,
exactly. And Brewer suggests that cultivating kindness and compassion can be a powerful way to counter those self-focused, fear-based thought patterns that often accompany anxiety.
Right.
It's like shifting from a state of self-preservation to a state of connection and care.
Yeah. He even quotes Abraham Lincoln saying, when I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion.
Yes.
It's a simple quote, but it really highlights the connection between our actions and our well-being. Brewer also talks about flow states as a way to counter anxiety. What are flow states and how do they fit into this picture?
Flow states are those moments when we're completely absorbed in an activity, losing track of time, and feeling a sense of effortless engagement and joy. It's
Yeah.
like being in the zone.
Right.
Whether we're playing music, writing, dancing, or doing anything that completely captures our attention.
I love that feeling.
It's the best.
It's like the world melts away and you're just completely present in the moment.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
these flow states can be incredibly rewarding and a powerful antidote to anxiety.
Okay.
It's like shifting our focus
Hmm.
from our internal worries
Right.
to something external that brings us joy and a sense of purpose.
Brewer actually shares how he wrote his first book, The Craving Mind, while in a state of flow.
Oh, wow.
He disconnected from technology, went on a self-imposed meditation retreat, and only wrote when he felt inspired.
That's amazing.
It's pretty incredible that he managed to write an entire book that way.
Isn't it? It's a testament to the power of flow states.
It is.
And he replicated this approach when writing his second book,
Oh, wow.
further supporting the idea that flow can be incredibly productive and enjoyable.
Yeah.
It really challenges the notion that creative work has to be stressful and difficult.
His story is really inspiring. It makes me wonder how we can cultivate more flow in our own lives, especially when we're feeling anxious.
That's a great question. I think it starts with, identifying activities that bring us a sense of joy and absorption. It could be anything,
Okay.
from gardening to playing music to writing code.
Mm-hmm.
The key is that it fully engages our attention in a positive way.
Right. Right.
And Brewer also suggests experimenting with different approaches
Yeah.
to see what works best for us.
Okay.
Some people find that structure and routine help them get into a flow state, while others thrive on spontaneity and improvisation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's about finding what works for us individually,
Yeah.
what allows us to tap into that sense of effortless focus and enjoyment. It's almost like anxiety and flow are two sides of the same coin,
Hmm.
one fueled by fear and uncertainty, the other by presence and joy.
Oh, I love that analogy. And Brewer really emphasizes that we have a choice in which side of the coin we want to experience.
Yeah.
He even challenges us to become extremists for kindness and compassion,
Okay.
to dedicate ourselves to creating a more just and loving world.
That's a powerful call to action. It's like saying we can use our understanding of anxiety not just to heal ourselves, but to contribute to a better world. It makes me wonder if Brewer himself had any experiences that pushed him in this direction, any moments that really solidified this message for him.
He does. He shares a story about a critical review he received for his first book, The Craving Mind.
Oh,
And the reviewer, who called themselves Amazon Addict, they criticized Brewer for not offering enough practical guidance. They
oh.
wanted more concrete steps for overcoming addiction.
Interesting. So someone critiquing his work actually helped him refine his approach.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the importance of being open to feedback, even when it's difficult to hear.
Exactly. And Brewer took that feedback to heart.
Okay.
He used it as motivation to write Unwinding Anxiety, focusing on providing practical tools and techniques that people could actually use in their daily lives.
That's great. It's inspiring to see how he turned that criticism into something positive
Yeah,
and helpful for so many people.
it is.
It speaks to a real commitment to helping people understand and manage their anxiety. And speaking of commitment, Brewer also expresses a lot of gratitude towards the people who supported him in writing this book. He mentions his editor, Caroline Sutton, who actually suggested that he focus the book on anxiety.
Yeah, it's a beautiful reminder that sometimes we need an outside perspective to help us see the bigger picture.
Totally.
And he also thanks his wife, Mari Leonard Fleckman, for coming up with the phrase unwinding anxiety.
Yeah.
It's such an evocative phrase, isn't it?
It is. It really captures the essence of his approach.
Yeah.
This idea of gently releasing tension and finding ease rather than battling against our anxiety.
Exactly. And it's so much more inviting than some of the other language around anxiety management.
Totally.
And Brewer also acknowledges all of the colleagues and friends who provided feedback and support throughout the writing process.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of community and connection,
Mm-hmm.
both in our personal lives and in our creative endeavors.
It's a powerful reminder that we don't have to go through this alone.
Yeah.
There's support available, both from the people in our lives and from the resources that Brewer and others have created. This deep dive into unwinding anxiety has been incredibly insightful.
It has.
We've explored the nature of anxiety, how it becomes a habit, and the power of mindfulness as a tool for unwinding it. But more than that, I think we've uncovered a real sense of hope,
Mm-hmm.
a belief that change is possible.
I completely agree. Brewer's work isn't just about managing anxiety.
Yeah.
It's about living a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Right.
It's about finding those things that bring us joy and purpose and letting go of the fear and worry that hold us back.
And he's given us some really practical tools to do just that, from mind mapping our habit loops to finding our bigger, better offers to cultivating curiosity and kindness.
Yeah.
It feels like we have a roadmap for navigating anxiety and creating a life that feels more aligned with who we truly are.
Yeah, it's the beauty of his approach.
Yeah.
It's not about forcing ourselves to be different.
It's about understanding ourselves more deeply and using that understanding to make choices that support our well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question.
Okay.
What's one small act of curiosity or kindness you can bring into your day today? What step can you take, however small, to begin unwinding your own anxiety and creating a life that feels more aligned with your values and your heart?
Yeah, remember, change starts with awareness. And even the smallest acts of mindfulness and compassion can have a ripple effect, not just in our own lives, but in the world around us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep exploring the amazing power of your own mind.